Hi, I'm Danielle Karen, and in this podcast, I'm going to share with you knowledge and tools that I believe should be accessible to everyone. They're fundamental and essential to being human. Embody Your Power is an integrative model that bridges science, spirituality, and ancient wisdom to give you the resources needed to live your fullest potential. As a psychotherapist for over 16 years and now as a coach, I help people know, reclaim, and embody their power on all levels. It's my mission to help you connect to your unshakable resilience, to know true power and freedom, to be sovereign, and to remember your divine nature. If you're wanting to learn tools to release layers of conditioning, heal from trauma, feel at home in your body, have inner peace, expand your capacity for joy, connect spiritually, and take a journey with me to embody your power, then this podcast is for you. Thank you for joining me. Together, let's raise our consciousness to help evolve humanity. How do you respond to people you care about when they're hurt, sad, vulnerable, fearful, difficult, triggering, or even infuriating? In this episode, I'll share tips on how to navigate relationships from our core self. I'll explore how to respond to other people when they're hijacked by the parts of their psyche that are operating from fear and pain. We'll look at how you can embody your power by accessing your core self in the presence of others that can knock you off your center. You are a unique expression of Source, as is everyone else. What feels best to us when we're connecting with others is when we're both embodying our truest essence of ourself. When we're accessing our core self, we're in the present moment with each other, and when we're in the present, we can experience play, spontaneity, laughter, joy, connection, intimacy, peace, and ease together. The parts of our psyche operating from fear and pain are not active. The past and the future are not where our attention is. We're not projecting our fear, pain, or anxiety onto the present moment. We're not coming from a place of controlling, judging, assuming, or anticipating anything with the other person. Would you agree it feels great when someone is present with you? When we fall in love with the other person's core self. It's a meeting between our true self and the others. Our core self is the most attractive aspect of ourselves. This is truly where the juice, magic, and excitement comes from. We're present, conscious, and mindful. So what happens when we're not in the present moment embodying our core self, which is conscious? Then we're engaging with others from parts of our psyche that are operating from our subconscious programs, our default programs. Cell biologist Bruce Lipton, author of The Honeymoon Effect, emphasizes that we create the honeymoon experience with our conscious mind, and then we lose it when our subconscious programs kick in. That's when the magic fades. He suggests that we can keep the honeymoon phase going by learning how to stay conscious and work with our subconscious programs that are outdated and sabotaging our relationships. Dr. Bruce Lipton is also the author of The Biology of Belief, and in his book, he helps us understand how many of our subconscious beliefs are formed when we're young. From the ages of 0 to 7, our brain is in a theta state, which is a type of hypnosis, which means that we're all being downloaded and programmed by others around us without any discernment about what goes into our subconscious programs and what doesn't. We continue to be programmed after that age, but we have more agency and discernment as we get older and we access different brainwave states. He goes on to explain that by the time we're in our mid-30s, we live 95% of our lives from our subconscious programs. Only 5% of the time are we conscious and in the present moment navigating our lives. He also shares that 60% of our subconscious programs are self-sabotaging or limiting, which is very significant to consider. Our subconscious programs are default programs, meaning they're automatic and we don't have to think about them. This is a really good thing for the helpful programs that we have. However, when it comes to the programs we downloaded that are limiting, destructive, and self-sabotaging, it's a major challenge. I see this in my work every day. Everyone is struggling with the subconscious programs that don't serve them and are creating great hardship in various areas of their lives. It's a major cause of suffering. Think about it. Let's say you bought a brand new laptop and were excited to work on some creative projects, but when you turn it on, it only has software programs from 1980 to 1990, or whatever the first decade of your life was. How productive would you be at your creative endeavors? Everyone is operating from very old programs, unless they're doing the work to access their subconscious and update it. Bruce Lipton would say, if you want to know what subconscious programs you have, take a look around at the major areas of your life. The things that are easy for you, you have subconscious programs to support those things. The things that are very challenging and difficult for you, you don't have supportive subconscious programs for. Let's look at some examples of our subconscious programs that we learn in the first decade of our life from an integrative perspective. Physically, we learn motor skills such as walking, running, riding a bike, and fine motor skills like writing. The acquisition of language skills happens during the early years. Once we learn these things, we don't have to think about it. We can easily do it. That's the power of the subconscious mind. Physically, we also learn important self-care routines, such as personal hygiene, eating, and sleep routines. The importance of physical activity, play, and exercise can be instilled in children at an early age and become lifelong habits. We learn about our physical boundaries. At an early age, we start to develop a relationship with our physical body, how we feel about our body, and how we care for our body. Intellectually, we're exposed to information about the world through our 5 senses, what we're told by adults, from reading books and watching programs, and what we learn and memorize in school. This information shapes the way we see and interact with the world. We develop basic problem-solving abilities through play and exploration. These skills lay the foundation for critical thinking and decision-making in childhood. Psychologically, we learn values that guide our behavior. In our formative years, we're shaped by society with morals and manners, and we learn what's acceptable and what's not. We learn concepts of what's right and wrong. We develop empathy and respect for others. We develop a relationship to our fears. We learn coping mechanisms that become the protective parts of our psyche and ways to feel powerful when we don't know how to access our true power. How others treat us and speak to us when we're young forms our beliefs and messages about ourselves. People who hold up an accurate mirror to us when we're young help us profoundly to know the truth about ourselves. Physiologically, we learn how to regulate our nervous system. Our parents and caregivers can teach us how to regulate the intensity we can feel in our body. The adults in our lives can help us learn how to regulate in relationship with them, which is also known as co-regulation. This is when an adult is calm, present, and regulated, and they help their child regulate when they're struggling because the child can feel their parents' regulation. Our attachment style with our parents also impacts our ability to regulate our nervous system in close relationships. Emotionally, we can learn how to identify, be with, and regulate our emotions. Whether or not our parents were attuned to our emotions impacts us. We can get messages from our family or culture that some emotions are okay, while others are not. We learn from observing others how to manage our emotions or avoid them. If we aren't taught how to be with our emotional pain and not to be afraid of it, then psychologically, we develop all types of coping mechanisms to avoid our emotions. Emotional pain and not knowing how to manage it is at the root of our suffering. At an early age, we start to develop a sense of self. Self-love, self-confidence, self-worth, self-acceptance, self-compassion, and self-respect. When others show us how to repair emotional ruptures, we learn valuable relationship skills to come back into connection. Relationally, the early years are crucial for forming attachments and building trust with our parents. Healthy attachments provide a sense of security and help form healthy relationships throughout our life. Unhealthy attachment can cause difficulty in forming the relationships we desire as adults. We learn how to interact with others, share, collaborate, communicate, and build relationships during these formative years. We absorb cultural and societal norms, including manners, etiquette, and customs, which are important for adapting to specific social environments. Through relationships, we learn how to make contact and connect with others. Nutritionally, children learn what and how to feed themselves by what's being modeled by those around them. They can learn healthy ways to nourish themselves, to tune into when they are hungry and full, to make good decisions for their health and well-being. Parents can help children understand the connection between food and mood. Emotional connections to food can be established during childhood. Children may learn to use food as a source of comfort, regulating emotions, or as a reward. Depending on whether food was scarce or abundant can influence our attitudes towards resources. Family mealtime rituals and traditions, such as sitting down together for meals, expressing gratitude, and whether or not it was a relaxing or tense environment, can have a lasting impact on our relationship to food and eating. Spiritually, we develop an understanding of ourselves and the world based on what we're exposed to. Children often absorb the religious or spiritual beliefs of their parents or caregivers. These beliefs can become deeply ingrained in their subconscious minds and influence their worldview, moral values, and understanding of source, the divine, or spiritual realm. Many religious and spiritual belief systems include concepts of the afterlife. Exposure to these ideas during childhood can contribute to an individual's beliefs about what happens after death and a connection to something bigger than us. Children can also learn to fear God and death. They can develop concepts on whether there's some authority over their spirit or not. Some children may have early experiences that they interpret as miraculous or mystical, which can be fostered or neglected. Children can be encouraged to listen to their own intuition and trust themselves. These experiences can have a lasting impression and shape a person's beliefs and relationship to their spiritual nature. I'm outlining some major areas that influence our subconscious mind to emphasize that all of us are dealing with a set of subconscious programs that got wired in at a young age. Unfortunately, we didn't have a say in which subconscious programs we received when we were young, and some of the programs were helpful and supportive, while others were destructive and harmful. Perhaps this alone can make space for greater compassion for others. When we encounter other people's parts, such as ones that are lacking boundaries, critical, aggressive, grumpy, anxious, avoidant, superficial, fearful, people-pleasing, manipulative, controlling, or betraying, it can trigger our own parts very easily. Our goal is to stay connected to our core self as much as we can. I've talked a lot about the core self and the parts of our psyche in this podcast. The parts of our psyche are operating from the subconscious mind, while our core self is conscious. When we work with the parts and understand why and how they're operating from our conscious mind, we're able to change the subconscious mind and have greater compassion for ourselves. Self-compassion is essential to our health and well-being. And when we have compassion and understanding for ourselves, we can extend it to others. In episode 6, Protectors of Our Psyche, I explored the positive intentions of common parts that many people struggle with. When you listen to this episode, you may start to have greater compassion for your own parts. Through the process of working with our protector and exile parts, we have greater compassion and understanding for ourselves. I have to say, it's incredible to witness someone completely transform in front of me when they experience compassion for a part of themselves for the first time. And this happens very often in my work. When we have compassion for our own parts, we can have greater compassion for others and their parts. We can start to identify our own and others' protective parts of the psyche that are trying to protect us from some type of emotional pain or vulnerability. We can see that others are being hijacked by a young part and have the clarity that they're not engaging from their core conscious self. When we understand what's driving our parts to take us over, we can find common ground with others. It might not be the exact emotional pain that we identified in ourselves. Nevertheless, we can have greater understanding for others. There's power in seeing that everyone has many different parts of their psyche, and to know that most of the time they're being driven around by these subconscious parts. We can stay connected to our core self when we're able to identify our own parts that are getting activated. We work to separate from them so that we're not responding from them. When we separate from our parts, we can speak for our parts rather than from them. An example would sound like, I have a part of me that's feeling angry with you, instead of, I'm angry at you. To access our core self, we can ask ourselves, who am I in this present moment when I separate from this part? Or, what do I notice when I ask the part for some space? We can also try externalizing the part and placing it somewhere outside of ourselves, maybe in another room. Another technique is to try to hit pause on all of your parts. When you try these prompts, notice what qualities are present. Notice how you feel in your body, and notice what different perspective you hold. When we identify that the other person has been taken over by their part, we want to try our best to embody our core self. It's not easy, it's a practice, and we do our best. Again, it's important to have compassion for ourselves and know that we will have our own parts that will try to take us over. All parts want to feel validated, seen, and heard for their perspective. Just as a child would want to feel seen and heard by their parent. If you want to show up for someone from your core self, you can help the other person's part feel seen and heard while knowing that this isn't their core self. You might even say, I know this is just a part of you, not all of you. When you're being taken over by a part and you know it's not your true self, how would it feel to you if someone you care about said lovingly, I know this is just a part of you, not all of you? When we are operating from our core self, we are showing up in the most loving way for ourselves and others. We all have parts that get frustrated with other people. Many times it's because we expect them to be something that they're not in the moment. People are in adult bodies, so we expect them to act like an adult and the associations we have with that. However, it can be helpful to hold a perspective that many people are being driven around by parts of their psyche that are actually young parts. As mentioned in previous episodes, I like to see the parts of my psyche as young parts. This doesn't have to be the way you relate to your parts, as you may find another way that's helpful to you. Why is it helpful for me to see my parts as a bunch of little Danielles? One, because many of them were formed when I was young and just evolved over time. When we get to know our parts, we can see that they're operating from limited resources, understanding, and perspective. Many times they can get stuck at a certain age. Remember, the subconscious programming that happens in the first 7 years contributes to the formation of many parts. 2, when I see my parts as young, it allows me to access my core self and greater compassion for these parts. Think about this. If you're going through something heartbreaking, it may be much harder to access your core self and hold a bigger perspective if you try to relate to the part at your current age. However, if you imagine a young part, which can be at any age that comes to mind, is the one experiencing the heartbreak, then it's often much easier to access your core self and not be overwhelmed by the pain. In order to help ourselves and our parts, we need to access our core self and learn how to be with the pain in a manageable way. Then we can be present with our feelings and help them move through us. 3, when I see my parts as young, I can work to create healthy internal attachment between my core self and my parts, just as a parent does with their child. I think this can be harder to do when you see your part as the same age, a monster, a TV character, or an object, for example. Sometimes people can feel that a part is more powerful than them. And so in this situation, I help them see it as a young part operating from fear or pain, and they have an easier time accessing their core self and their true power. It can be helpful to see that everyone has little kids driving them around. We all have a core self and a bunch of young parts. Hopefully, the person's core self is in the driver's seat when we're engaging with them. However, it's likely at any moment we might be engaging with someone's young part. When this happens, our parts can easily get triggered, and then we're both engaging with each other on the level of subconscious parts operating from fear and pain. When someone is hijacked by a young part, see if you can have some compassion and understanding for that person. Realize they aren't accessing their core self in that moment. You're engaging with a young child part even though the person is in an adult body. When we've done this type of parts work with ourselves, we know how significant it is for our parts to connect to our core self. It's the nourishment that they crave. Also, when we do our own work, we can see that other people's parts aren't so different than ours. This can help us extend compassion for others when they get hijacked. We embody our power when we're accessing our core self, which allows us to decide how to handle the situation best. Once we can see the person clearly, we can decide whether to stay engaged or not. Compassion doesn't mean we're going to suffer and sacrifice ourselves in relationship because the other person is suffering. It's important to have compassion for ourselves and our own parts first and foremost. Put the oxygen mask on yourself first. Again, this helps create secure internal attachment. Taking care of our parts may require boundaries with others. In a situation where someone else's parts are trying to have power over us or hurting us in some way, then it's important for the core self to assert boundaries with the person. Verbally, this might sound like saying, "No, don't dismiss me, that's not okay with me. I heard what you said and I know the truth about myself. I see that you're angry and I'm not sticking around for you to take it out on me. I see that you're struggling right now and I can't help you. I'm not available for that. I know this isn't about me. I'm going to leave now." Physically, it may look like turning away, hanging up the phone, leaving the space, getting ourselves to safety, taking time to ourselves, or ending a relationship. We want to make sure that we're taking care of ourselves and our parts first, because we can create distrust and disharmony within ourselves when we allow our parts to get hurt by others. When we take care of ourselves, we are more able to show up for others in a supportive way. Here's some advice that comes directly from Richard Schwartz, developer of the Internal Family Systems model. I was in the car with him one day when I was sharing that I had someone who was very difficult to deal with in my life. Someone who was dysregulated, projecting their pain onto me, in a power struggle, and constantly pushing my boundaries. I was telling him that I would be holy if I could deal with this person, basically not getting stressed by them. I'm not sure why I used the word holy, but it was the word that came out of my mouth to try to get the point across that I would be taking the high road, embodying my core self, if the irritating things this person was doing didn't get to me. He turned to me and said, "Danielle, you're holy when you're taking care of your parts." Thank you, Dick Schwartz. I'm grateful to him for that clear and direct reflection, as it's always stayed with me. He brought me back down to earth when I was trying to spiritually bypass my own internal suffering and struggle. I saw in that moment that I was overriding my parts and exposing them to constant distress because I had another part taking me over that wanted to prove that I can deal with this person. And when this part that wanted to prove something was taking over, I wasn't being true to myself, I wasn't asserting my boundaries, and it was causing harm to some of my parts. He was encouraging me to listen to my parts and take care of them, not to keep exposing them to pain and suffering. Another reason why it can be helpful to see our parts as young is asking ourselves if we would expose a child to a similar situation that was causing suffering. This helps us expand our perspective on how we're impacting our own parts. So I took the time to separate from the protector part, access my core self, listen to my parts, and then take action to protect them and assert the necessary boundaries. In this case, I had a protector part overriding other parts. And in other situations, young parts can attempt to have other people take care of them. What do I mean by that? Most of us have young parts that didn't get certain emotional needs met when we were young. These parts can jump in the driver's seat and drive us around in an attempt to get their needs met by someone else. This could look like a part that's feeling lonely, rejected, unlovable, unworthy, ashamed, or insignificant. This part can get into the driver's seat to find someone else to make them feel better. If our part does look to another person to get its needs met, it can have specific expectations and put a lot of pressure on someone to take care of it, when the other person may not even know that, one, you're not in your core self, or two, that this part is looking to them to meet their needs and expectations. None of us enter into a relationship telling the other person that we have a young, needy part that we would like them to take care of. In romantic relationships, young, needy parts aren't sexy. We don't want to be in a position of parenting our partner. If an exile part gets in the driver's seat, it can be a setup for the other person to disappoint our young and vulnerable parts, thus leading to conflict and more emotional pain. This can also lead to codependency in relationship because the part isn't getting its needs met by our core self. It's important to know that as children, it was wise to look to our parents to get our needs met. We needed and depended on them to meet our emotional needs. We needed our parents to help us navigate our emotions. We needed to feel loved and nurtured. We needed to feel seen and heard. We needed to feel emotionally safe and protected. We needed them to reflect our core selves and the truth about ourselves back to us. We needed someone to hold up an accurate, shiny mirror to our true divine nature. These are essential needs as they help us access our core self, develop a healthy sense of self, trust ourselves, and know how to create healthy relationships as adults. It was wise to look to others to get our emotional needs met when we were young. However, at some point in our young adult years, we need to realize that our parents didn't meet those needs. We may need to grieve and feel the pain of not getting certain emotional needs met by them. Then we need to turn toward ourselves and realize our core self is now the one to take care of these young parts. The reality is that no one can heal these parts for us. When we take care of our parts, we create secure internal attachment with ourselves, meaning our parts can trust and relax into the core self instead of feeling needy, panicky, and vulnerable because they're dependent on someone else who's unpredictable and may not always be there. It doesn't mean that we don't need others or we don't need their love, affection, attention, and care. We do. It's important that we have other people in our lives that are emotionally attuned and nurturing. We just don't want to burden them with a part that's looking to them to feel better. when we're the only one who can help and heal that part of ours. I believe one of the most loving ways we can show up for the people we care about in our lives is to stay connected to our core self and not lose track of the other's core self. Meaning when someone we care about is struggling in some way and hijacked by their young parts, then the most loving thing we can do for them is to see their core self even when they can't see it or feel it. Know that their core self is truly who they are and have compassion for them being taken over by a part of their psyche that is either fearful or in pain. How would you feel when you're struggling to be in the presence of someone who sees your true essence and doesn't forget your true divine nature? At the end of this episode, I would like to offer some action steps for navigating relationships from our core self. Listen to episodes 5, 6, 7, and 10 to learn how to work with your own parts so that you can stay connected to your core self and have greater clarity and understanding for others. Avoid frustration by seeing the situation clearly when others have been hijacked by their young parts. Even though someone is in an adult body, they may be driven around by a young part. Practice bringing curiosity and compassion to others the way you would your own parts. When someone you care about is hijacked by their parts, it's loving and supportive to see and reflect their core self, even though they aren't accessing it at that time. This is a practice. It's not easy. And we're human, so we're not always going to be able to access our core self. And we're going to have our own parts popping up and needing our attention. It's important that we always have compassion for ourselves first. Thanks for listening to this podcast. If you found this episode helpful, please consider assisting me in reaching more people by sharing it with others or writing a review. Together, let's raise our consciousness to help evolve humanity. For more information, please visit my website, daniellecaron.com. That's DANIELLECARRON.com.